The way we interpret texts and ideas has sparked some of humanity's greatest achievements and darkest moments. Today, we're exploring how the same words can lead people down radically different paths.
That's such a fascinating angle to explore, especially when you consider how interpretation shapes everything from religious beliefs to political movements.
You know what really strikes me? The speaker makes this compelling comparison between how people approach ancient religious texts and modern political manifestos. They're suggesting there's this fundamental disconnect between reading words and truly understanding their deeper meaning.
That reminds me of how historians often talk about the dangers of reading historical documents without understanding their context. Like trying to understand Shakespeare without knowing anything about Elizabethan England.
Exactly right. And what's really interesting is how they specifically point to communism as this perfect example. They suggest it's like this sweet-tasting fruit that turns bitter, presenting itself as liberation while actually creating new forms of oppression.
Well, that's quite a vivid metaphor. How do you think this relates to modern debates about ideology and truth?
So here's the thing, they're arguing that when societies try to completely rebuild moral systems from scratch, they often end up creating something far more oppressive than what they were trying to replace. It's like tearing down a house without understanding why it was built that way in the first place.
That makes me think about how social media has become this modern battleground for competing interpretations of truth and reality.
Right, and that's where their discussion about eternal truths versus relative values becomes so relevant. They're suggesting that some fundamental principles transcend historical periods and cultural contexts, even as our understanding of them evolves.
You know what's particularly striking about their argument? The way they connect this to human nature and the tendency toward hubris?
Well, that's exactly what makes their analysis so compelling. They're not just critiquing specific ideologies, they're pointing to these deeper patterns in human behavior, like how we sometimes confuse freedom from constraints with actual liberty.
That's such an important distinction, especially when we look at how different movements throughout history have defined freedom.
And here's where it gets really interesting. They suggest that true freedom isn't about rejecting all authority or tradition, but about understanding why certain frameworks exist and how they serve human flourishing. It's like learning the rules of music before you can effectively break them.
So, how do you think this perspective might help us navigate our current cultural divisions?
Well, I think their framework offers several key insights. First, it reminds us to be humble about our capacity for reform. Second, it suggests we should examine the historical context of ideas before trying to revolutionize systems. And finally, this is crucial, it emphasizes maintaining certain fundamental truths while still being open to genuine progress.
Those are such valuable points for our listeners to consider as they engage with these complex ideas in their own lives.
You know what might be the most important takeaway? The recognition that these aren't just abstract philosophical concepts. They have real implications for how we live, how we treat each other, and how we build our society together. It's about finding that delicate balance between honoring wisdom from the past and being open to new understanding.
That's really what it all comes down to, isn't it? Finding ways to move forward while staying grounded in timeless principles.
Exactly, and perhaps that's where we should leave our listeners today with this challenge to think deeply about how they engage with ideas, whether they're ancient or modern, and to consider the responsibility that comes with interpreting and applying them in their own lives.